The Bureaucratic Animal. Prologue. In March 1967, a short memorandum dealt with a subject that sounds, at first, like it escaped from a bad intelligence parody. It spoke of trained cats. Certain details were hidden behind black bars, but the shape was clear enough. There had been a program. There had been training. There had been equipment. There had been repeated checks. The animal, no matter what one may think of cats, is not the strangest part of the story. The languages. Act 1. The requirement. Before there is a cat, there is a requirement. In intelligence work, the cleaner term is a collection requirement. Information is missing, and someone has to find a way to get it. The problem enters the system, and once it enters the system, it can be assigned. During the Cold War, that kind of absence had its own pressure. The useful conversation was often imagined as happening just out of reach, behind a wall, across a street, inside an embassy garden, near a doorway where a person could not stand for too long without becoming part of the scene. Intelligence work lived inside that distance between what a state wanted to know and what it could actually reach. Some problems had familiar answers. A room could be prepared. An object could be altered. A microphone could wait in a place where people expected furniture, lamps, walls, and silence. But an outdoor conversation had less to offer. The requirement becomes simple to state and difficult to answer. How do you get close enough to hear a conversation when a person cannot get close enough without being noticed? That is where the first reasonable sentence appears. A cat can move through a public place without attracting much attention. Pure nonsense is easy to reject. Institutional absurdity works better when it begins with one practical observation. The observation here was that an animal already present in a landscape might be able to go where a human operator could not. From there, the problem changes. The question is no longer whether the animal is an animal. The question becomes whether the animal can be made useful to the requirement. And once that happens, the system has stopped seeing the cat only as a cat. It has begun to see a platform. The requirement has been accepted. The system does not begin by asking whether the premise has lost proportion. It begins by asking what has to be solved next. Act 2. The recruitment. The subject is not recruited. It is selected. It does not agree to anything. It is not turned by ideology. It does not meet a handler in a safe house or decide that history requires betrayal inside a hotel bar. The system has already translated it into a possible instrument. The project began in 1964. The broad idea was to use a cat to listen to outdoor conversations. The design, as later described in CIA public material, was direct enough to be disturbing. A microphone would be placed in the cat's ear. A transmitter would be carried under the skin. An antenna would be woven into the fur. The animal would move near the target. The equipment would collect and transmit sound. On paper, every part has a function. Once described that way, the project almost manages to sound like engineering. This is one of the traps of technical language. It can break a living situation into parts so cleanly that the violence of the whole arrangement becomes harder to hear. The body becomes housing. The ear becomes access. The skin becomes storage. The fur becomes cover. The cat becomes a device that happens to be alive. And because the device is alive, the project immediately meets a problem no schematic can erase. A cat is an animal with a private relationship to the universe. Anyone who has ever lived with a cat understands this. The whole project required one thing it could never fully own: It needed the cat to behave like equipment without ceasing to be a cat, and the cat, because it was a cat and not a junior field officer, had no reason to respect the burden of intelligence work and national security. The file could improve the equipment, it could test the animal, it could record progress, but it could not remove the animal from the animal. The CIA was not only trying to hide a device inside a cat, it was trying to hide the cat inside a device. Act 3. A remarkable scientific achievement. By 1967, the project had reached the language of conclusion. The memorandum arrived in the ordinary manner of institutional endings, with controlled phrases and careful distinctions. The program would not lend itself in a practical sense to the specialized needs it was meant to serve. In cleaner language, the operation couldn't do what it had been built to do. The memo pointed to environmental and security factors. Environmental factors meant the technique would have to work outside the protected conditions of a test. Security factors were just as serious. Once the cat carried equipment, it became a compromised object moving unpredictably through the environment. In other words, the problem was not only that the cat might fail, the problem was that the cat might fail in public while carrying the method with it. The conclusion was unavoidable. The project was not practical for real use. Then the memo saves what can still be saved. Cats could indeed be trained to move short distances. That, it says, was a remarkable scientific achievement. The personnel involved are praised. The work receives credit. The project is closed, but not disgraced. The memo understood enough to stop, and still knew how to congratulate the attempt. Epilogue. There is a large number often attached to Acoustic Kitty, $20 million. It appears in many retellings because it is clean, shocking, and easy to repeat. The declassified memo and the CIA's public account do not give that figure. That means the exact cost is not established by the basic public record. But the absence of a clean number does not mean the project was cheap, casual, or brief. The known timeline runs from 1964 to 1967. 3 years of institutional effort ended there. Equipment, training, technical work, review, and time all entered the file. The missing number does not erase the shape of the investment. It only leaves the accounting incomplete. And the most durable thing left behind was the wording.